What's up guys, Houndish here, and today we're going to talk about Money the Game. Now that's a dramatic way to describe things, but it is very clear that Destiny at this point is Bungie's money farm. And actually, that's kind of okay, maybe. Bungie have built a very successful game with lots of engaged players, and of those engaged players, most of us don't have an issue with Bungie being successful. I certainly don't. I enjoy playing Destiny and I want this franchise to be around for a long time. So let's please not make this an I hate Bungie video, because it isn't, and I don't think things are necessarily that simple. Like many of you guys, I still enjoy the game and I want to see it be better. However, there is a clear pattern of cost increases, monetization opportunities, and probably the worst of it really, community unfriendly tactics for monetization, which are emerging. And it doesn't require me to make this video for players to know that. A lot of players are already noticing it, so I wanted to give my thoughts on that today and highlight what it is that players are seeing, why some of it doesn't seem cool, and some of why that might be happening as well. And yes, we should say, starting out globally, we're all experiencing some amount of inflation. Everything costs more money, and Bungie have to absorb the effects of that as well. But the question is, does that justify the price changes in Destiny and some of the tactics that Bungie are employing? I honestly don't know. And at the end of this video, let me know your thoughts on it down below. I can only give my opinions and highlight wider conversations in the community, so be sure to share your opinions on it in the comment section. So firstly, let's talk about the Season Pass cost increase and the season in general. And Season Passes now cost 1200 silver, which in itself is a small cost increase that might not have been viewed too poorly. I think one of the craftiest things about that is that if you're purchasing silver to pick the Season Pass up, the bundles jump in increments of 500 silver or more, so you have to spend more than the cost of the season itself in order to actually purchase the season. That is, unless you happen to have some spare silver already, which I know some players will. But ultimately, you are still paying for it. And personally, I've got less of a problem with the Season Pass increasing by the amount that it has than I do with the fact that players can't just make a direct purchase of the season for an actual cost. Of course, that is outside of if you purchase the annual pass for the game. However, a lot of folks don't do that, and I'm no expert, but firstly, having to pay more simply nets Bungie more cash, right? That's the obvious part. But additionally, I don't doubt that there is a psychological component there as well, where players left with 300 silver, for instance, which you can't really do much with, right? Many of them are going to feel inclined to purchase more silver afterwards in order to actually spend that extra 300 silver they have. So I'm almost certain that there is a psychological component to that design. And a lot of us know game devs have famously, for a long time, worked with experts to figure out how to drive more engagement, exploit addictive behaviors, and ultimately get people to feel like they need to spend more money, which at the very least must be the icing on the cake to that cost increase and the specific way that it's designed, right? And I think that's bad for returning players because they're probably getting less content than in many previous seasons for that cost, and we'll explain some of that in the video. But to look at the season itself and the season activity content, I think it's alright, and at the very least it's expected seasonal content. We've got salvage, which yes, it's new, and we have deep dives, which are new as well. We've got fishing, and players will engage with and feel different ways about that stuff. But the bottom line is that this is seasonal content and it feels like it's seasonal content. So depending on your preference, you may love it, you may find it kind of boring. For me, I think deep dives and triggering pressure trials and trying to get those essentially flawless clears to get tier 5 loot or upcoming hidden encounters is one of the most engaging parts of the new seasonal content, but otherwise it's pretty typical season activity stuff, which isn't a complaint in itself, but the fact that this stuff is costing more and more over time is certainly noticed by players, especially when Bungie aren't really breaking the mold in terms of innovation for that content. It's also worth noting that weapons are reprised. Some of them are pretty good, but we've got a reprised set and a reskin of that reprised set inside of that season cost, which players do take issue with. It's costing more of players' money to essentially get the same content or less than before, and again, that isn't going unnoticed. So, season cost increases, yes, they make Bungie more money, but also it may be designed to sell more silver, and that demonstrates to Bungie's investors, and of course Sony, who now own Bungie, that they can sell transaction currency, and it also may be designed to drive more sales of the next deluxe expansion, right? Because players know that they're going to spend more money if they buy those seasons separately, and those expansions are what, like $100 all in, so whichever Whichever way players go about it, there's more cash in it for Bungie and more opportunity to prove their ability to sell. And I think the main issue with that overall is that players aren't getting more for their cost. I fundamentally enjoy Destiny expansions and seasons, and I don't mind paying for it, but when we start to pick apart the components of this costing, without a doubt, a pattern certainly emerges. And that's where we should talk about the dungeon key. And dungeons also don't come as part of seasons anymore, they are separate purchases. So realistically, we can't view the dungeon as part of the season's content package from a monetary standpoint at least. But it is a very good dungeon. In fact, I think it's one of the best pieces of content that's dropped inside of Season 21. That's just my opinion, but it does cost around an extra $20 to play both of the dungeons this year. So again, Bungie simply make more money by doing that, but they also realize that a lot of the very casual player base for Destiny doesn't necessarily engage with dungeon or raid content. And so when they sell a season, there'll be a reasonable margin of people who don't factor that dungeon into their purchase cost because they know they're just not going to play it. But that equally means that when you remove that piece of content from the package, a lot of those more casual players don't really even consider that it's not there anymore. The players who do consider it though are the ones that love endgame content, and if they're playing Destiny at all, they really don't want to miss that new pinnacle endgame stuff, right? So what do? We purchase the dungeon key, or at least we get an edition of the annual expansion that features that key access. So when you look at that bigger picture, it's a win-win for Bungie no matter what happens. And again, it's something that players realize is happening. The other component to all of this is what's happening in the Eververse store. And for a long time, Bungie have sold items that can be purchased for in-game currency, Bright Dust, as well as the silver currency that we have to pay for. And the vast majority of those shared currency items will go up for sale for silver first, right? We've known that for a long time, but for a couple of years, thanks to Today in Destiny, we did have a workaround for that, which allowed us to see which items would be sold. So players could say, hey, I'm not spending silver on this today because in 2 weeks I can spend Bright Dust on it instead and save that cash. And I've known for the entirety of that time that Bungie do not like that. So this season, they've gone ahead and hidden the data that reveals that rotation. And some might say maybe it's so that players can be surprised and delighted at the weekly reset when they finally see those juicy cosmetics they've been waiting for. But unfortunately, I don't think that's the reason it's happening. I think it's because they know that they were losing money and opportunities to sell stuff for silver, because players were aware of how that rotation was going to work, so they've simply hidden it. I'm also not complaining about that because it means it's harder for me to make a reset video or a video about not purchasing items for silver. Sure, that is a personal component for myself, but this has a wider impact on players of the game and how much money they potentially feel like they want to spend on it. And continuing on the Eververse conversation, it's clear that this season has fewer new Bright Dust items available than in many previous seasons. There are of course some new things, but when we look at what's populating the Bright Dust section this season, the vast majority of it is items from last season or the one before, and we should remember that that is stuff that they've already sold for silver in the past. And surely, again, I'm no expert, but it has to be about driving more purchases of silver items instead. And Tarsion on Reddit pointed out, there have been a couple of big Reddit threads about this stuff in the past few days, but this season there are no new Eververse armor sets available for Bright Dust. So where collaboration or elemental armor sets previously had a Bright Dust option, they don't appear to be a thing anymore. And that's on top of the fact that silver costs for these items have only increased in recent months, so picking up the new PlayStation armor ornaments can cost around $20 per set. When you think about that, that's the quarter of a price of a standard expansion. It's more than the price of a season or a single dungeon. And all of those things contain armor sets, maybe multiple armor sets, weapons, and various other in-game drops. So the value proposition and the comparison between different pieces of content is just kind of absurd. I should outline here as well, I'll be honest, I don't really purchase silver items. I don't think I've bought anything for silver for like 5 years. And that's not because I'm not willing to spend, but I'm just not tempted by it personally. It just doesn't interest me most of the time. And I think that's just because, while there may be a really cool silver armor set, I also really like the dungeon armor, and I've already paid for the dungeon, and that's content I can actually play, so it just doesn't bother me. That's just my mindset. I'm not saying there's anything wrong at all with buying stuff that you want to have though. I just want you guys to understand my position on it so there's no confusion. However, overall, when we look at the base costs of those things, it kind of blows my mind just how much money players can be tempted to spend in Destiny. And that isn't a new thing, but when you see the expansion cost going up, the season cost also going up, then the dungeons going behind a paid key despite appearing to look like part of the season, right? That's the psychology. Then Bungie are hiding Eververse rotations while adding less Bright Dust items, increasing the cost of silver items. And that's not to mention the trickery where a standalone season costs an amount of silver that you can only overspend to achieve, assuming you start with nothing, right? That's a lot of stuff changing, and it's happening pretty fast. So again, players see this happening, and the biggest issue for lots of players isn't necessarily that the game is costing a little bit more. It's that we're seeing all of these changes in different areas of the game, and also the fact that the game isn't improving at the same rate. Sure, Bungie have been doing some really cool stuff. We've got quality of life improvements, builds, there's new progression like Guardian ranks. Bungie are adding LFG later on this year. I'm not saying that Bungie aren't doing cool things with Destiny, but as Shadowblade on DTG pointed out, there's a lot of fundamental Destiny stuff which isn't really changing that much. And that's a new thread that's gone up in the past day or so. Luke Smith had said previously that we'd be getting both new playlist armor and new trials armor sets every year, and we haven't consistently seen that happen. Players also complain that Gambit hasn't seen big changes, despite the fact that Joe Blackburn said they are testing big stuff. They also suggested Crucible would get a more consistent rollout of new maps, but the progress on that stuff is incredibly slow, let's be real about it. There's even discussion about strikes. The fact that we're seeing less strikes launching with Lightfall in the year of Lightfall so far than what we've seen in previous years. And then this repetition of the kind of seasonal model. Again, it's not to say you shouldn't enjoy Destiny or there's no reason to enjoy Destiny. That isn't true. And it also is a personal opinion, and it's one that I don't hold. But again, players see that the game isn't changing or innovating at the same rate that it's costing considerably more money to engage with, right? So I think that is the bigger problem for most players. And those are certainly the issues that I take with the way that Bungie are kind of focusing on stuff. Again, it isn't a simple cost increase for a product that presents itself and is obvious what we're getting. But it's more that feeling that there are sort of community-unfriendly tactics, and also putting costs behind things that previously were part of seasons or expansions. I'm not saying Bungie shouldn't be making more money, but I just feel like the way that they're approaching that, especially given the sense that some players feel like Destiny might even be coming towards the end of its life cycle, with Bungie announcing a new title, us not really knowing what will happen beyond the final shape. Certainly for some players, it's creating kind of bad vibes, so I'll be curious to get your thoughts about it. Those are mine. I'm sorry if I'm over-explaining the fact that I don't hate Destiny, but sometimes when I do these more critical videos, you get players who are kind of on the extreme end of one viewpoint or another, right? You either absolutely love Destiny to death and you're a Bungie shill, or you're hating on the game and you want Bungie to fail. I totally believe there's a place in the middle, which is better for everyone overall, especially since we're still here playing this game, like nearly 10 years in, so most of us want it to be good and most of us want to carry on playing it, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't criticize things when you see them. So that's my thought process, guys. If you've enjoyed the video, please do share your thoughts down in the comment section. Who knows, this could even be a good feedback point for Bungie. They might take note of it, they might not. I don't know. For now though, I appreciate you tuning in, guys. Enjoy the rest of the season. As always, I'll still be keeping you posted, so you can subscribe if you want to see more. But otherwise, I hope you guys have an awesome day.